Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'll be your host today, and we're going to be talking about lessons from a decade in indie dev. Now, developing an indie game, it's never a straight path, as it's often a long road filled with challenges and unexpected twists. So today, we're going to explore one person's journey and how they tackled all sorts of obstacles and successes, all while keeping momentum alive and fostering a dedicated community. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have my good friend, Leonard Stuart. Leonard, how is it going? I never call you Leonard. I call you Len. But how's it going, man?
Just call me Len.
How is it? Like
Leonard's so like 13th century,
Yes.
Leonard Randolph Stuart the third.
So much more official. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know Len, he is a creative director of Sortech Games. He's also the co-owner of Sortech, and he's the creative director on specifically Pixel Noir. And if Pixel Noir or Sortech rings a bell, it was this is for you very devoted listeners. In episode 3, we had Kunal Majmudar, who is also of Sortech Games. He's a co-owner too, correct, Len? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So now we have Len here. Lots of but anyways, and just to give you some more insight about Len, and Len would love to, feel free to fill in some of these blanks I might be missing here. You're the graphic and web designer, doing a lot of the graphic and creative side of things with Pixel Noir. You've worked at, RPI Industries, Inc., and you were even a former game critic at I remember you guys doing this, the SML podcast. I can't remember now what it was, but it was like game reviews or something, right?
Yeah, so they wanted to get into game reviews, and I was like their resident RPG person for a little while, and then I got the job at RPI, and I just couldn't dedicate as much time to it as I used to, But I did it for about I think 6-7 months,
Yeah, I remember it. Well, it goes back. Well, a lot of things will go back today, but otherwise, I mean, a lot of your key and core strengths and stuff have been graphic design, web development, and obviously game design too. And everything from the creative direction, obviously, but also the UI, UX design, pixel art, especially for Pixel Noir, which has, yes, very well been a passion project for 10 plus years in the making. And I know with Kunal, that's what we talked about then, specifically with crowdfunding. But now, and here I know we're going to talk about more. But for a second, for those of you who haven't listened to episode 3, Len, please share a little bit about Pixel Noir and what it is.
Pixel Noir is a turn-based RPG, and you play as, you start out as like a new detective on the force. And what happens is you get basically something happens and lands you in the prison. And when you get out, you're like this done-store detective, and you're kind of like, setting your you're setting your stuff up for to find the real culprit that kind of landed you in jail. I was trying to do that without being spoilish at all. So
yeah,
I guess I did a good job there.
It can be tricky to navigate, but yeah, because I worked on this project with you guys in a few different times, and it's what was so intriguing about it for me was just the fact that it was a detective JRPG, as we like to label it as such, and hey, it's so many great things about it too. It's like with a Nord type atmosphere, you can't get any grittier than pixelated, beautiful pixelated work. I'm trying to make up words here, folks. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, really cool concept and everything else. And I know, you guys clearly had a lot of fun, but it wasn't all just, butterflies and roses either, which I'm sure we're going to get into in a little bit. But no, thanks for sharing more about Pixel Noir. And before we get into our conversation today, I'd love for our listeners to get to know you a little bit more. And to do that, folks, as you probably already know, is we're going to have Len go through the Q Box round, just a few random questions I prepared for him. So, Len, are you ready for the
Yes.
Q Box round? Oh, look, he's boom.
Abs-
Beats me right to
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
first and foremost here is what's the most helpful or impactful advice you ever received?
Keep going, you know, because you never know what's going to happen if you keep going on something that you're passionate about. You'll like learn so many new skills. You'll become a different person through the experience, and it may pay off in other ways.
Yeah.
Even if what you're trying at, no matter what it is in game design or life, it'll always lead to something else. Even if what your goal is ends up failing, you know, you'll become like a really good, person regardless out of the experience.
Yeah. Failures are still learning experiences. So love it. Next is biggest gaming pet peeve. What is it?
So I'm going to roll this into the story about how me and Canal got Pixel Noir, came up with the idea. Basically, what happened was back in 2010, I reconnected with Canal at some kind of house party that he was playing in a cover band in. And afterwards, we were talking about like game design and things like that, and how I really wish I could make a game that wasn't like, strictly like for kids, because I feel like every video game is like high fantasy and for kids. Like, can we like break that mold somehow? Like, why hasn't the industry touched this yet? Like, what's going on? And that was like my biggest pet peeve back then, and it still is now. Is that I feel like a lot of games these days are not targeting out of like people that are less than 21 years old. They're still like kind of stuck in this like, hey, video games are for kids. But now that I've kind of gone through like the whole indie dev experience and everything, I can understand why people go that way, because it's easy. It's easy to do. The template's already there for you. But I think like it still bothers me that people want to make it into Kitty City, as I like to call it. It's the old toy store from the 90s. Where everything in there was like literally for like kids that are like 12 and under.
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I felt like the gaming industry was like even now. But it's gotten better since I started
Oh, yeah.
doing this with Canal. So it's good to see that. But yeah, that's basically it. Kitty City.
Yeah. That's such a great like point and analogy, because it's like, what was it? I can't think of her. Allison Rupert, I think it is. I had her on the show not a while ago, and I think she could relate. I can't speak completely on her behalf, obviously, but one of the things she called out was like, the way that, her specialty is really focusing on horse games, right? And she was like, oh, so many publishers or people in the industry for the longest time like basically viewed anything with the horse in it as far as a central aspect of gameplay is basically, oh, it must be catered to little girls that love My Little Pony.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right. So and she's like,
yeah,
there's people who like horses that aren't little girls that like My Little Pony. Like it's and she found that niche and totally showed like, see, like exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
The
you make a
tropes
awesome
like go
point.
from like video games to like basic real life things, and it's like, can we like break this? I mean, we're in a creative field here, so
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's, what is it like? I mean, we see this in so many other mediums too. Like the best one I could think of, because me having kids, is Bluey of all things. But still, I've heard stories where the video game didn't quite do as well as the show. But still, it's making it accessible, right? Different audiences. So great point
that's
there
right.
on a pet peeve, because I am right there with you. Okay, next and not least, but the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
Oh my God, I'm playing so many games right now. I started playing Elden Ring for the second time. I tried playing it the
Second
first
time.
time and it was just way too hard. And literally, Andrew, this is the first time I've ever modded a game to make it easier for myself. And now I'm playing through Elden Ring
So
like on easy mode basically, and it's so much fun. It's a freaking
can
blast, you know.
I don't mean to interrupt, Len, but can you give me tips on how I can mod? What's it called? Why can't I think of it? The goth one. Same guy.
Golf story.
Bloodborne.
Oh, Bloodborne.
Because I have
Well,
problems
you
with
know,
Bloodborne. I haven't even
so
beaten the first level.
they have this thing. I forget what it's called, but what it is it modifies the saves for PS4 games. So you could use this app to do that. It costs like $50
Okay.
or whatever. I can send it to you
Oh,
after
okay.
the
So,
podcast.
all right. I'm
yeah.
digressing, folks. I did that one. All right. So Elden Ring. I can cheat because I can see there's a list. What else are you playing, man?
Oh yeah. I kind of kick it old school sometimes. So I'm like, I go with Final Fantasy Tactics is usually my go-to. It's probably like one of my favorite games ever. So I mean, I always find myself going back to it and playing it and trying to break it in different ways and stuff like that. And I love that game. There's Final Fantasy. I'm playing through Persona 3 right now, Reload. I really like that game. I loved it on the PS2, and then I haven't like played it since like probably 2009, 2010, whenever it came out. So it's like totally different than when I was playing it before. Yeah.
Sweet. Big
I mean,
big lineup there.
I even downloaded Diablo 2, Tactics Ogre, which is very much like Final Fantasy Tactics.
So all recently, right?
Yeah.
So this is your lineup right now.
Yeah. You know what? I also fall into like, you know, almost never finishing a game sometimes because I'm playing so many. Like,
That's my
you know, like it's just the pure, you know, volume.
Oh yeah,
I can't
yeah.
keep up, you know.
Awesome. Yeah, and great stuff. An interesting fact for all of us here, not that it really matters to anyone other than maybe Len and I, but I found it was from you I learned the connection between Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy 12. So
Oh, really?
yes.
The what that they both take place in the same world?
Yes. So
You believe?
interesting. Yeah. Interesting fact. Okay, but we got to move on. So, Len, thank you for sharing all that other stuff. We got to learn about you a bit more, but now let's get into this conversation. You know, lessons from a decade in indie dev. And let's face it, it's been a long journey, right? So to kick off things here, and I know we need to be focused here because there's probably so much, right? A decade, folks, think about it. Like working on anything for an extended period of time can seem like a long time, but Len and I go back quite a bit, so we'll keep it direct. But kicking things off, like, let me ask you this: how has your vision for the game changed from when you first started to now? Because I'm sure there's lots of changes that happen from the beginning to now.
Well, when we started, me and Kunal were thinking like, well, we just make a mobile game and like try to, you know, pitch the concept at GDC, which we ended up doing in 2013, I believe, or 2012, 2013. And people were like receptive to it, but they were like, you don't even have a game yet. So make the game and maybe we'll talk about it, you know? And so we had to put together a team, of course, and then and then the Kickstarter thing, and then we started working on the game in 2013 and 14 there to get a demo up for our Kickstarter. But what happened in that process is that we were like, this is going to be like crazy if we try to do mobile and console. So let's just shoot for console and make a really good game rather than some kind of cheapy mobile thing, you know? Because like if we're going to be doing an RPG, we might as well just jump in with both feet, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, not do anything any half-ass situation, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And one thing I think is interesting too about that is I didn't know that about the mobile part, but throughout that journey and process, I do know, well, for some people, I'm sure this can be a rough subject, which we may get into or whatever. Nothing horrible, obviously, but like, you know, from mobile, it did transition into, you know, looking to get like PSP support or you know, or a
Vita.
port. Oh, Vita, that's it, not PSP because
Yeah.
yes, but yeah, but still, it was like this kind of like it's just I think that's really interesting because it's like the vision changed, you know, a bit in terms, especially from that perspective too, but also like kind of did what it could to be consistent with it too, which well, I thought that was really interesting because I didn't know anything about the mobile aspect.
Yeah, I mean, this was before you, this was before even Leo. We were working with somebody that, kind of built a little demo for us just to play internally on the phone. I don't know if I'd still have it. I probably do on an old iPad somewhere. But anyway, he made this thing for us on mobile, and we were like, oh, it's cool, but console's probably going to be where it's at. So we like totally dropped that. And then our first programmer after that he was like, okay, I'm quitting because you're not making a mobile game.
Well, that happens. I mean, that's part of
Yeah,
the challenges we face and stuff. You know, not you did mention Kickstarter, and I kind of want to talk about that a little bit because I think one of the
sure.
interesting things about this journey is really the community that you guys have built over time. So, in light of Kickstarter and such, I'm just curious, like, how did your early supporters and backers influence the direction of the game? Like, was there any real influence, or was there extra support that happened that I don't know helped you go in certain directions or whatever? I'm curious, like, what kind of role they might have played in kind of shaping things a little bit.
Well, as you know, like, we had two different Kickstarters. We had our first one was asking like way too much money, and we weren't really showing anything in the game. So of course that flopped. And then the following year, we, kind of scaled back and everything, even the goal and everything. And then when we got funded by that, that's when the community really started giving us some creative feedback. We had a successful Kickstarter, and even a lot of our reward tiers would like, say, hey, you can make an NPC, or hey, you can make a boss, or whatever. And so and a lot of those creative tiers really influenced a lot of different things that are in Pixel Noir. We even have like quest lines that people made, a lot of different things like that. And it was just, we got some of the really coolest side quests out of just, random people who donated to our Kickstarter. And I think that's where like the most of like people's influence, outside influence, came into, kind of change Pixel Noir for the better. Because I would say like probably without their help, I don't think a lot of the game's weirdness or uniqueness would ever like really show through to people who love the game today.
Yeah, and I mean, I do remember helping facilitating some of the correspondence with those backers. But
Yeah.
while it's a while ago, I do remember some of the stories that were surfacing that they were coming up with were like you said, that uniqueness. It was very diverse and nothing I would have expected, but it ended up really working well and adding like probably so much more value, I think, to the game and the overall experience. Then I think if you looked at it real quickly, they'd be like, huh? But then it made it what it is in a way. I mean, not the whole holistically, but it was definitely a big part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it really helped to have a really good writer too, because when we were creating the game, we would do it basically all by script,
Mm.
and our writer, Jennifer Keating, she wrote us whole entire scripts for chapters. And we had to like edit and do things like we would do roundtables basically where all of us as a team would get together and go through this entire script and put in like things that we need or things that we want to take out, and then after that we would implement it into the game engine. And then after that, I would usually go through with a fine-tooth comb and kind of choreograph the scene and maybe edit some of the text to kind of go along with the choreography.
Yeah.
And that really, I mean, that was like, to me, I always think of it like tempering a sword. You're
Yep.
folding the metal and pounding it out, folding the metal and pounding it out. And that's basically what we were doing with the story creation process there.
Yeah. Again, and that's interesting too, and it's very dynamic as well because it's like when you're talking about some of the community involvement. And again, this is a very focused setup too. It wasn't like free for all, because there's no way that would fly. Free for all community
Yeah.
involvement, right? And everything
Well, you know
else.
what? Let me interject one thing
Sure.
too, is that I think that the first Kickstarter, while it was a failure,
Mhm.
it probably got us the most bang for our buck as far as community goes.
Mm,
Like, we thought we had like over like 1,500 followers right after that Kickstarter.
yes.
So
Yep.
and this was like, and when we launched this Kickstarter, it was at PAX East. I think you were there.
I was.
I'm not sure if you were there or not.
That's where we first met. Is that
Oh,
PAX
yeah,
East?
right, right. And so we had like, we had someone who ended up joining the team later, like press the button to like start the Kickstarter on that morning.
Yeah.
And then we had so many people who came up to the table. We had this one YouTube guy who had like over 1 million followers on YouTube, and he did a whole like half-hour, diatribe on our game. It's like he had never even played yet, but he wanted to talk to me and Canal so bad, and there were so many people at our booth that we kind of like gave him the brush off, but he ended up doing the video anyway. And I was like, holy shit, like, how are we like, getting this popular, And then I saw this influencer guy, and I was like, that's why,
Yeah.
It wasn't just because we did PAX East.
Yeah. Well, to kind of shift things a little bit too, I'm curious because again, a lot of the things that we were just talking about now, happened like pretty at least, geez, I think pretty close, if not like 10 years ago. PAX East, the first Kickstarter, and all that stuff. And so if there's that, there's a second Kickstarter, and in fact, a lot of folks, if you're interested in checking out that episode with Kanal, that's exactly what he's talking about, is how the failed Kickstarter, and then how the second one was a successful one. Now, after that point, then, I'm curious because there's still a lot of time in between. Like, were there any particular strategies or anything that worked really well for you guys, to keep your community engaged over the years? Because I'm sure some of us are probably thinking, even over that time, that can be a lot to keep people engaged with the progress. And we all get it. We all have lives and stuff, and sometimes these things take much longer than we would like. But what worked in terms of keeping that community engaged for all that time?
I think the fact that we were putting out Kickstarter updates on a regular basis with always something interesting that we're doing with the game, or putting in the game, programming into the game, making graphics, working with the different Kickstarter backers that did creative tiers for us. And we always had something to show in our regular updates. And we would do like an update like every other month when we were kind of like in the middle of things. And then as like we got to the end, we started doing it like once every 3 months, so quarterly. But we found that doing the regular updates while also going to different conventions and showing off the game was its own reward, as far as keeping everybody interested in the game, but also bringing on new people who wouldn't necessarily find us because we're just like a grain of sand in the desert, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So so it was really just kind of like a scattershot of like a lot of different things over a decade,
Yeah.
because that's, if you just keep pounding at it, like I was saying before, you eventually get somewhere. And we weren't really like community focused until the Kickstarter, so we were just like, oh, we're building this game. Okay. We got a team. We got a little bit of a ragtag team. We're building this game. Okay. Oh, we need a community. Oh, we have a community.
Yep.
Oh, we have to foster this community, and it was just like, no, and I remember saying to Kanal, I was like kind of a little frustrated when I realized this, and I was like, no, I didn't like sign up to be like an influencer, dude. I just want to build this game, man. And he's like, no, you got to do both, and he was totally right. You have to do both.
Yeah.
But I think the real reason that we ended up with the community that we had was just because we were just at it for such a long time, putting out decent updates and everything,
Yeah. And I know that, well, like at some point too, I think like you kind of you basically conveyed in what you just mentioned is it can be a learning process in terms of like understanding the importance of, man, I'm going back now because I'm remembering some of these things when we had these conversations. It's like the importance of, keeping that transparency, keeping that level of consistency. And when it comes to
Yep.
transparency, how transparent? Because it's like there's times when you really don't need to share every detail, even though you want to, but you still have to instill confidence. You still have to show progress. You have to do all these, send all these signals out to your community, especially, and this is regardless of how long it takes you to make a game. But like on top of that,
That's right. Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
it's a challenge. And yeah, I would have to agree with Kanal. It's like you got to know those things and so, or do those things, and sometimes it's just super important to then look at what else you can do, what else can make it interesting and such.
Absolutely.
So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit because we talked a little bit about the community, and as I kind of
Hmm.
alluded to earlier, there's it's quite a journey. This whole process, especially with you guys, it's
Yeah.
been a long journey. And
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not going to try to push you too hard or whatever, but you share what you want. But what were some of, like, let's say, the biggest surprises, both good and bad, that you encountered along the way? Because there's a lot of them.
I think one of the biggest ones was the first time of me and Kunal actually having this conversation to build this game. I wasn't expecting to see him at this house party in New Brunswick. I just happened to bump into him there, and I hadn't seen him in like years, since we were like in high school. And I was like, ah, it's Kunal. What the hell, And I asked him what was going on and what was up, and he was like, "Oh, I'm making like, music for games and film." And I was like, "Video games? Oh shit." And then we started talking about, making video games and what my idea was for Pixel Noir. And that was like just nuts. That's something out of like a movie, man. You can't make that up. Like it was crazy. It was just crazy. That is like the biggest thing in my mind. Other smaller things too were like, getting a successful Kickstarter, and then all the pressure of, trying to live up to expectations after that. And I think that was like it was very self-affirming,
Yeah. So
it'll put you in your place,
so that said, what were some of those
Yeah.
expectations? Because just for additional clarity and understanding of like, trying to meet those things, and because sometimes they don't always get met, and that can be a little bit discouraging for both, the team and players.
Yeah. So for us, it was kind of more like, really being able to deliver on the things that we promised, and over the years, there were things that we had to toss or we couldn't promise, or it sounded good back then, but, in practice, we couldn't really do it, or it doesn't really fit with the game or whatever. But I think the biggest disappointment for, Kickstarter backers were that we had to like basically change platforms as we've gone through the years because, older consoles will phase out and you can't put a game out on it anymore. It doesn't have like an eShop or whatever, like the 3DS, the Vita, we had to toss those for, Vita or for Nintendo Switch and newer consoles as we kept going on. And I think it discouraged some backers and fans while it may have brought on others. It was just like this big like sea change kind of as we kept going on through. That's like basically, I don't know if I answered the question correctly there, but
No,
yeah.
it's fine.
Okay.
And I may push a little bit and just say yes or no. There was definitely some unexpected things too when it came to representation that you guys have, but I didn't know if that's something that's you wanted to casually go over or not, but it's completely your call.
Representation is as in what?
Publishing.
Oh, yes. Oh, there was that. I always try to like put that out of. I always try to put that out of my mind
I
because it was just kind of like
I
it
know
was here and that was
post traumatic.
gone. And
Yes, I'm well aware. So that's why I'm giving you a cool out, and I can provide very high level context if needed. So, but again, I'm letting you
no,
make that
sure.
call.
Hey, listen, man, I'm cool with talking about all this. So
Okay.
basically, what happened, it was in 2016, the beginning of 2016, we had Badland Publishing come and basically say, "Hey, we want to put out your game. Let's talk." And and it was really exciting because we were like, "Oh man, we were actually approached by a publisher. We didn't have to approach them. This is so cool."
And you
Blah
guys
blah
had
blah blah blah.
several
Right?
cases too, right? There's they weren't the only ones. There were others that were approaching you, if I remember correctly, or at least you were courting some and having
No,
conversations. So,
well, we were, but none of them offered us like a deal. Like,
okay,
here's a deal. Boom. What
yep,
do you think? And it turned out to be a really good deal for us. It wasn't like it's just a 50-50,
yep.
normal publishing deal. It
So
was
the
like a
stars
seventy-five
aligned.
twenty-five deal. Yeah, yeah. Plus, they had a really good team of like marketing people who wanted to work with Canal, and Canal had some great ideas for them, and they were bouncing back and forth, and it was a thing, right? But and then like later that year, they flew us out to Barcelona, where they're based out of, and we did Barcelona Games Convention with them, and that was a blast. That was really cool. Pix Noir like really did well there. And then after that, they understood that it would take years before we would eventually finish the game, right? So
Mhm.
it was like, okay, we're just going to let you go, and we'll back off, and you just tell us when you're done, guys. And so that's kind of what we did. But as time went on, people like moved on from Badlands, and there was like exodus after exodus of all these people that we were once dealing with. And then they were all gone. And then there were these new people who didn't know who we were, and we didn't know who they were. And so we had to like establish kind of like a new relationship with them. And then they wanted to like re-up the contract and do different things with profit sharing. And
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it got to be kind of a mess until a little later. And then they were just like, well, we're gonna, allow you to keep this deal, but we want to do this and we want to do that. And in the end, it really just didn't work out because they weren't doing their end of the house,
Yeah.
and their end of the house was like the marketing stuff and helping us with that, but they weren't doing any of it. And Kunal and I were just so frustrated. And this is like 2 years of frustration with them. The last 2 years, which were just, it was just totally horrible. It was like, oh, hey, like you you want to put out a early access, and we did that in, I think it was 2019 or 2017. I forget when that
It
early
was
access came out.
somewhere in that time frame. I know that. So yeah. Yep.
And then what happened was, we wanted some kind of like advertising for them to put out with this early access, and they didn't do anything. They
Yeah.
did nothing.
Yeah.
It all came up with a whole big plan. I
Yep.
think you were in on that, or
Hmm.
Dickie was, or something like that.
Or at least
And
provided some insight. Yeah. Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah. And then they took none of that. And then me and Kanal just had to make the choice to just cut them off.
yeah. Well,
Like they weren't really helping.
yeah. And let me ask you this too, because I don't necessarily, I mean, there's probably a lot of like underlying things and things that it's not even worth like talking about really. And we're not here to bash anybody either.
Yeah.
But the question I have too is do you think that dynamic or things could have changed too if, let's say, it's not, because it does sound like to some degree they didn't anticipate the game was taking as long as it would to finish. So if you think that timeline was reduced, do you think that could have changed the outcome a little bit? And it might not have, but I was just curious on your thoughts.
I I think it would have, because say that we finished it before like the Exodus happened, right?
Hmm.
We would have been working with all those same people who were
Yeah.
really excited about Canal's marketing ideas, which they weren't later on. They wanted to do their own thing. They weren't even,
Your priorities are different.
humoring Canal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess the priorities of the company were different, after the, exodus of people, and then like we were given like people who didn't really know us or didn't have
Yeah.
a rapport with us. It was just, hey, I'm a stranger and I'm here to represent your game now all of a sudden. And I think that was kind of like a little bit of it. There's a lot of like little parts too. Like we saw that Atlanta got in trouble for putting out a game, and they ended up taking like the money, the rev share from the developers or something like that. And it was all on like game news and stuff like that. I forget the name of the game right now, but yeah, that was also like something that kind of soured me and Canal towards the end,
Yeah.
you
So
know, and that didn't happen before, you know. So,
yeah,
I mean, if we would have finished it faster, we probably could have had a great relationship with Badlands. But I think it's probably the fact that we did take way too long, you know.
yeah.
You know, I'm not gonna mince words here. We did take way too long making this thing, you know. I mean, I started this thing when I was 27. I'm now like 42, and we just put it out last year, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know.
But I mean, and you know, sometimes folks that's a hard lesson to learn and stuff, you know. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's all relative, but I mean, but I think we know this. We're seeing it in a lot more circles. I think Unity was they came out with some stats of like, oh, the dev cycles are becoming like you know are reducing. They're becoming smaller and such, and
Mhm.
we're being more mindful of you know missed opportunity with too much time for projects and all these other things too. So you know, in light of that too, Len, I mean, like looking back, what advice would you give to devs, you know, working on these long-term projects, regardless of how ambitious they are or not?
Well, you know, I always get this question at convention, and I always tell people the same thing, which is the thing that's always on my mind, you know, like working on this project is that I should not have started with an RPG. Because that's like you're literally making a movie then at this point. You know, you got all kinds of different mechanics in there and you know, different story things and choreography and graphics, and it just becomes like a three-ring circus when I could have just came out and made like, you know, Blaster Master or, you know, some kind of clone of it, and it could have taken me like a year, and I could have done this with less people and it would have taken less time, etc., you know. And I think I would have started like if I could do it over again, I would start out with like the smaller game first and then like take that game and use the cloud through the community that I built through that small game and the money that I made up from that small game to build the RPG that I wanted to make. You know, that probably would have been like the wiser thing to do. You know,
Hmm.
so really, it's like you know, don't start with an RPG, man. Maybe start out with something just a little simpler, and then go from there. You know, but if you're doing an RPG at first, man, you're just going to be like learning lessons and stuff and relearning lessons over time and you know and I've seen it with other devs that decided to make an RPG as their first game too, especially at this past magfest that we were both at.
Yep.
I talked to so many devs who were just like, yeah, I started out with an RPG, and I'm like, oh yeah, how's that going? Well, I'm about 12 years in. I'm like, yeah, rookie.
Lucky. Yeah.
So,
No.
you know, and I think that's probably like the big lesson. You know, don't bite off more than you can chew. Basically, you know what I mean. Start simple, and you know, try to navigate there. You know,
Yeah.
before you take on the bigger fish. You know.
Exactly, and not only that, and I think this has been discussed on the podcast before with other guests and stuff. If you look at it, it's each game you make, regardless of how good it is or how bad it is, it's just one other you know one other learning point. It's like it's another experience. The fact that you can even say, hey, look, I launched a game, I completed a game. So if you're looking at you know publishers down the road for future projects, you know they're looking at a lot of things, and one of which is your track record. What have you produced? How do you work with the team? How do you get your product out to market? Like there's all these things to consider.
Yeah.
Where you know these bigger projects, well, I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, they're really fun and cool once you get them out there. But who knows? Maybe the smaller stuff can help you learn that much faster in a
Not
shorter
only that,
period of
but like
time.
let me add this is that you know I also think that if you're a new game developer, you should be developing tools for yourself,
Yes.
development
Yes.
tools for
Yep.
yourself. I know that from working on Pixel Noir, we have so many tools that we've built internally to build Pixel Noir. Now, if you take those tools and say you want to build the next game, we have those tools
Yeah.
already
Yep.
built, so we don't have to take years to make these tools again for this next game.
Yep.
We can use the other tools that we made to make another RPG if we want, or whatever. It becomes, substantially less time because you're not building any tools anymore.
Absolutely.
And so if you build a small game, you're building these tools that are just as important as if you built a larger game, and you can take those smaller tools or whatever and make better games later.
Yeah, and I know what was I forget the episode number, but Seth Coster from Butterscotch Shenanigans was on the show talking about that same exact process. And I think one of the stories he shared was how he's talking to some, I think it was like members of Unity or whatever, how they identified some bottlenecks in their process and whatnot. So they did that. They developed these tools and devoted like X number of months to do that. And they were still able to deliver the project actually before the deadline. And the Unity guy's like, how do you do that? Because you took that time away from that to do something else. So wouldn't you add? And he's like, no, it's because that savings in the tools we were developing, that time savings ended up making things done earlier. And it's
Totally.
And it's those things that can make all the world of a difference. I mean, they have other terms, DevOps and such, but still it's understanding those things. And because I see this too in the work I do all the time, but sometimes we look at it like, oh, that's going to take X number of hours, and I really just need to keep going with this thing and finish this thing. But sometimes doing that process is where you can really start scaling. And once you can see and identify those opportunities where you can scale, boom, that's when I guess the magic can happen. Not to sound cheesy.
It's great. It's great once you have these tools, because then kind of like the world of possibilities open up to you as a dev in ways that you didn't really think of when you started, right? So these tools, you can be like, oh, I can use X tool to make this kind of game now, or whatever, and then you can, those thoughts germinate within your team that you have, or if it's just your own head,
Yeah. So let me ask you this now. I mean, we identified some cool things in terms of, these tools and such and other things. Was there anything like unexpected, like skills or lessons you learned, from making a game so long? Because I'm sure there's other like gains that came from this. It's like, in retrospect, if we made it shorter, everything probably would have been a lot better. But because of this, what were the other cool, unexpected things that you picked up on?
I became better socially. Like when I started this, I wasn't really all that social. I didn't really know anything about project management. I was just literally just a graphic guy. I would, edit Photoshop images for people and do a lot of freelance graphic design work and web design work. And I didn't know anything about anything except for like project managing my own stuff, And when I got into, project managing for game development, I used none of the lessons that I used working on freelance stuff for like the years before that, so it was the brand new like field, and I feel like I can now like project manage like pretty much anything now, like I have a method, I have a way of dealing with people. I have a way of, putting priorities together so that things actually get accomplished, and there were so many lessons that I've learned. I can't really like, drill down on one or two, but I can say that through working on this game for so long, I've definitely become a great project manager. And I just, I never saw this coming really for myself,
Yeah.
And I think I think that's like the wonderment in at least my journey, I don't know how everybody else feels, but managing a team and actually getting things done as a team is so surprising to me. When I started, it was just like, wow, like, okay, I can do something here. I got a power, I got a superpower that I never knew I had, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that's really cool revelation because, as you were saying that, and again, I wasn't necessarily privy to a lot of, development meetings and stuff, but there was a period of time I did sat in them. They were Sunday afternoons.
Oh yeah.
And I have to say, I think it's funny from the beginning of this episode, you led into like one of the tips what's impactful result, just keep at it and such, right? And
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
years that I've known you too, I would have to say I've noticed that too. And it's like, it's not anything I would ever like identify right away. But now that you're calling it out, I've noticed that change too. And so like everything from, little things like how you deal with the team, different ways of approaching, situations, problems, and coming up with solutions and stuff. And it's really
Yeah.
interesting because, and I love these types of conversations because I'm a big proponent of, reflection and what do you learn from these things. And because sometimes we're always about pushing forward, but if we don't kind of like look back and to see where we were, we can't really recognize, what we've become and the strengths that we now possess and everything else. So I figured I'd
Not
share
only
that
that,
with you
Andrew,
too,
but
but this is so enlightening at the same time.
not only that, Andrew, but looking back gives you motivation to keep going,
Yeah.
right? Because there would be times where I'd be like trying to like implement stuff into Pixel Noir. And I sit back in my chair and I'm like, why am I doing this? What am I doing to myself? Where is my life going? And then I think about like the things I've done to get to where I was. And I was like, yeah, I just have to keep going, like this is the only route that I know now. And I just have to keep going,
Yeah.
and it just makes you more motivated to just keep trudging.
Yeah, definitely. Well, man, this has all been amazing, enlightening stuff. But before we depart, is there like one big tip or suggestion you just give to people listening today? Because we talked about a lot.
I don't really know. I would say like a lot. I would say a lot of the stuff that I was talking about is kind of like what you should probably try to like figure out yourself. Making tools, keep moving, keep going, keep growing as a person. Here's one thing that I wish that I would have done more during the last 10 years. Leo did this. I didn't. Leo got into like doing like Ninja Warrior stuff, right?
Yes, yes.
So he was doing all this other stuff that made him grow as a person. He could use some of the skills maybe he learned there with us at making Pixel Noir. I didn't do any of that. I was just like laser focused on working on the game, testing the game, building the assets, and all that stuff every day. I didn't do any other extracurricular activities or anything. And this was also a time where I also didn't have a job for the first half of working on Pixel Noir. So I was really, really focused on working on Pixel Noir, but like the piece of advice is that have something else also going on. Not something that you got to be doing full time, but like at least something else that you can say, all right, I got to take a break from my game project because it's good. It's making me nuts, right? or maybe I'm obsessing too much, or maybe I'm like talking down to myself too much, and then I'm going to go do some other things, have it be non-video game related, have it be like, I don't know, join a gym class like Leo did, or some kind of other thing that isn't like computer or video game related. And that will make your time that you work on the video game feel a lot more fulfilling, because then you're not getting sick of the same old, day in, day out thing,
No, really good stuff there. And, I don't think we can't say that enough, folks, because it's like burnout's for real. And you gotta let your
burn
mind
it out is for real.
You gotta let your mind escape, and I think Leo's a prime example of that too, because I mean, he was like legit, like basically pro, right? Like that's how dedicated he became with that.
Yeah, yeah,
just like
he played in a lot of different competitions. He's been all over the country doing these things.
Yeah,
probably since he started about a year after I knew him, I believe, like a year. Like we met in like 2013, and then I think he started doing that like 2014, 2015 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's been just doing it ever since. And, he liked, I like to say that he likes to keep his plate full,
Yeah. Yep.
he likes a busy life,
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's a really good, blend of things, because you're right. You said it right there. Burnout is real.
Yeah.
And if you can mitigate that in any other way by giving yourself other distractions, That's great.
It sounds counterintuitive though, right? Because it's like do more and you burn out less. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
At any rate.
Well, it's doing the same thing every day. You know, if you're doing the same thing every day, I don't care what it is, whether it's game dev or basketball or whatever, you're going to get sick of it.
Yeah.
It's like listening to the same music over and over and over again. You know, eventually you're going to be like, you know, I'm going to take an ice pick to my eardrum because I can't stand listening to this music anymore. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, all great insights and everything else, but I know we're coming on time here. But before we do, Len, what are some ways people can reach out, connect, learn more about Pixel Noir, or pick it up on Steam or wherever else it may be?
Well, we got our website, swdpechgames.com, Sortech Games, and Len Stuart on LinkedIn. I also got like a website that's like my own personal website at ashlandish.com, ashlandif.com. And it's just really like, you know, links to my portfolio and things that I've worked on in the past and kind of it. I'm not really on social media. I'm Len Stu82 on Discord. I'm Len Stewart on Facebook, but I'm like rarely on Facebook anymore. And I think that's kind of it.
Okay,
you know,
cool.
because you can get to everything that I'm a part of right there.
Sweet. Yep. Well, Len, we really appreciate your time today and, you know, diving back into memory lane, if you will, and really sharing these stories. Sure. I think they're really enlightening and hopefully we can, you know, I'm sure a lot of us can take something from them today. So again, appreciate your time and being here today. It's been really motivational. So thanks, man.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.